Hey, how you going, guys? You'll have to forgive me. I'm not particularly gifted when it comes to technology, so it's taken me about an hour to try to figure out how to set up this live stream. So, um, give me a moment. I've got to try and figure out how to share the links and all that. This is a one-man operation, so I don't even have somebody that's able to do the sort of social media stuff whilst I do the stream. So, bear with me. But if you are in the channel and you are watching, if you could do me a huge favor and just chuck a comment letting me know so that I can see whether it pops up on my little screen here and test to see if everything is all working. So bear with me. I do apologize. It's a bit of a rough start to the stream. It's been quite a while since I've done one of these, so I'm a little bit out of touch, and it turns out every program and everything on my computer needed to be updated. Everything had to be uninstalled and reinstalled, and I had to log into everything, and it's just an absolute ordeal. But I think we're getting there. Test comment, the test for the test god. Fucking yes, that's a perfect test. Fantastic. Okay, well that means that we've got DeSalga and Casey, who can both clearly hear and see me, which means we are up and running. So the next most crucial element of any hobby live stream is the Jack Daniels and Coke. Cheers, everyone, and yeah, let's get stuck into some hobby and some conversations. So, all right. So, first things first is this live stream. The idea is that I have all of these blood crushes in front of me that I need to get painted for an upcoming potential tournament. I'm going to be lending them to a mate who's going to be running them, so I need to get them ready for him. But I also know that it's been a while since I've hit you guys with any content. So what I thought I'd do is kill two birds with one stone and paint these guys and have a conversation with you guys live. Now, there's been a lot of things happening with the channel and with me on a personal level and with me on a professional level when it comes to 40k. So I thought potentially what we could do is have a sort of a 2023 wrap-up where we basically talk about all of the stuff that's happened throughout the year and some of the exciting developments there, and then also get into answering any questions you guys might have, or if there's any topics you guys would like to hear me sort of, approach, then we can obviously do that as well. So yeah, if you have any questions at all that you'd like to hear me answer, or any topics you'd like to hear me discuss, just chuck in a comment. I will be checking across at the monitor there, every however often, and I'll be answering any questions that you guys have. So 2023 for me has been an absolutely monstrous year. So I guess achievements wise, some of the things that I'm really, really happy with this year was in May earlier in the year, I was captain for Team Victoria that's my home state here in Australia. And we have this thing called the ANZ TC, which is the Australian and New Zealand Team Championship, where basically every state within Australia and the North and the South Island of New Zealand all put together a team of 8 players, their strongest players in their state, and then they go head to head in a WTC style team format. So I was captain for Victoria this year, and we came second, only getting beaten by Queensland, who historically have won, I think, the last 7 out of 8, or it might be 5 out of 6 events. So they're a very, very strong team. They have a very, very strong position. So we lost to them, but we came second overall, which is the best that my home state of Victoria has done, the best placing that we've done in that same 6-7 years, right? So really, really proud of what I was able to do with the team. Really, really proud of what I was able to put together. And that was a massive achievement for me, one of my biggest achievements of all time. Then I basically, after that, I really did have an absolute craving for Team 40k. So I joined Team Australia for the World Team Championships as a coach so that I could experience that culture, that environment, and also travel to Europe and play against, people from all around the world. So that was in August. I went along with Team Australia as a coach. Had an absolute blast. I played in the War Masters singles with World Eaters. This was just after 10th edition had dropped, so relatively fresh. Everybody was fresh. Everybody was green. Played in that and did quite well with the World Eaters, considering that at the time they had like a 30% win rate, and I think I got there were 6 games and I won 4 of them, I think. Yeah, I won 4, lost 2. So that was a really, really awesome and exciting singles event. And then we went into the teams event, and I basically helped Team Australia out in a coaching capacity, which included everything pre-event leading up to the event, like helping them train, helping them prepare, helping them write lists, helping them test out different ideas, helping them get them armies together and prepare the models, and that there's so much work went into the lead up to the event. And then on the day, I was helping communicate between players what their scores were, what their positions were, so that they knew whether or not to play more aggressively or more conservatively. I was also helping out with, running errands for the team. So, for example, one of our players, he had some big blisters on the back of his feet, and he had these new shoes, but he couldn't wear them because of the blisters. So I shot down to the shops and bought some some sliders for him, so that he didn't have that pressure on his heels. Just little things like that to make sure that each player was able to focus on just the game and do the best that they can in that environment without having to stress about, other elements. So there was one bloke on our team that was a celiac, so he can't eat gluten. So I was able to go, cool, lunch is coming up at the venue. There is no gluten-friendly food. So I went to all these different shops in Belgium trying to find gluten-free food, which is always an exciting ordeal because, none of it's in English and it can be quite challenging. Just things like that, as well as, pumping up the team and getting them water throughout the event, or if there's a judge, they need to get a judge call, I'd go and find a judge for them. Lots of stuff like that, which was really, really great. And Team Australia came 3rd at this event. So even though I didn't play any games for Team Australia, I do feel that I contributed to that result because, if I wasn't there facilitating those things, the team may not have performed at the level that they did. So very, very proud of the boys and very, very proud of the Australian, 40K community for being able to put together a strong team and send it over there and did really, really well. And then in the aftermath of that, basically the captain decided that he's played WTC several times now. He wanted to take a year off to focus on his family and his career and those sorts of things. So he stepped down as captain. And I put my hand up and said, look, I know I haven't played in the WTC before, but I've got proven track record with Team Victoria. I've also experienced it, so I have an understanding of it. And in that coach role, I was able to be very observant of all of the different elements, what was working, what wasn't working, whereas the captain was playing, so he might not have had the same sort of holistic view as I did. So I basically put forward my case for why I would like to be elected as captain, and nobody else put their hand up, because everybody else was like, well, Dean's obviously fantastic for the role. So nobody went against me. I ran unopposed and was then elected captain for Team Australia, which is an absolutely phenomenal position, and it's very, very exciting opportunity for me. So that's the next big thing from 2023, was that now I'm not only captain of my home state of Victoria, but I'm captain of Team Australia for the World Team Championships, which is absolutely exciting AF. So yeah, that's sort of the next element. And that's the thing that I'm going to be focusing on very, very heavily going forward. On top of that, we've got a bunch of singles events throughout the year that I had some pretty good success with, so I had a lot of fun on the singles front, but I really am dialing my focus in on Teams Warhammer 40k. And if people would like to, we can definitely get into the differences between Teams Warhammer 40k and singles, because I personally am a very, very strong believer that Team 40k is the future of 40k. It solves so many of the problems with the singles style of Warhammer 40k, and we all know what the challenges with 40k can be at times. And I think almost every single one of them is almost perfectly solved by the teams format. So if people want to, let me know in the comments, and we can have a bit of a talk about that. But yeah, so basically I'm going to be focusing a lot on that. There are still some singles events coming up in a couple of weeks from now. I think 3 or 4 weeks from now. We've got Uprising, which is the Australian ITC Championship. So I will be attending that, which is really exciting. That's going to be a really big, probably 250 to 300 player event here in Australia. And yeah, that's going to be an absolute ripper of an event. So attending that's going to be fun. We've also got the Men's of Masquerade, which is going to be around here in Melbourne, which is a really awesome event where basically the tournament organizer takes all of the entry money, he hires a scout hall, and everything that's left over goes into free alcohol and free food for the event. So it's a really, really exciting, high energy social event where, people get a little bit more relaxed, they're a little bit more, easygoing, and they have a lot of fun. So, but at the same time, when it's a relatively small event, and we get a lot of the top players from around Australia attending that event, and so it's cutthroat whilst being relaxed. It's an absolutely amazing event. It's one of my highlights of the year, so that's coming up as well. I think that's in late February. So those will be the next two main events that I'll be focusing on in a singles capacity. And then we're also going to be doing a bunch of fundraising events for Team Australia in order to make it so that the boys don't have to spend $10,000 each in order to attend, because flights from Australia to Europe are very expensive. You also are going to have to take time off work in order to facilitate the trip, which is, again, can be quite a significant financial cost. And then accommodation and all those sorts of things when you're, earning Australian dollars and they have, the euro, it's like, yeah, it's going to be a very expensive trip. So basically I'm going to be doing a bunch of fundraising efforts in order to make it so that we can sort of lessen the blow on the wallet of all the Australian team. So yeah, that's basically what I'm focusing on going forward, and that's a bit of a recap of the last year. The main emphasis for me last year, obviously, the channel had some really fantastic success because the drop of 10th edition meant that there was lots of exciting opportunities for conversation, and so that's obviously fantastic. However, we're now entering a realm with 10th edition where there's a lot more opportunity to delve into the nuance of things like model placement, and a lot of the things have been clarified. We know exactly how everything works now. So going forward, I'm looking to do a little bit more in the detail stuff, and a little bit more in the sort of overall way of approaching the game, like my recent video on the art of the trade. So I'm going to be doing a little bit of both of those style content. There's a lot less combos in 10th edition, and a lot of the fun that I had on this channel previously was exploring different combos that you could build, especially with Chaos Space Marine Codex. That used to be a lot of fun. A lot of that's been stripped away, so it's not as exciting in that regard, but there is a lot of nuance to the new edition, so we'll be talking about that a little bit as well. So I'm just going to have a quick read of some of these comments here, and yeah, let's keep going. So we've got two comments here. One of them is from Kenton Evans. I was wondering about the coaching thing. How does that work? Are you at the table with them? And Nikki Collin is, I'd be interested in the differences between teams and singles, as I'm pretty, there's a freaking emoji over the top of that, something new to the game in general. I think it says new. The streaming software has a little emoji over the top of that word. So I can probably answer both of those questions in a similar sort of vein. So I'm going to actually start doing some painting as well, instead of just standing here talking to that. So give me a moment to get some paint set up. I've got 18 Blood Crushers here, and 4 Blood Masters, 3 Skull Cannons, a what do they call the chariot with the herald on it, whatever it's called. I don't know what they call it anymore. And I've also got Skull Taker here, and I need to get them done. So I'm going to try to simultaneously, let's see how well my multitasking skills go, because I'm going to try to simultaneously paint these cunts, drink this bottle, engage with chat, talk to you guys, and preferably not spill anything. So we'll see how we go. So let's start with, I'll start with Kenton asking about the coaching thing. How does it work? Are you at the table with them? So I assume you're in reference to coaching at the WTC. And basically, yes, you are at the table with them. Apologies for the highway that's just outside of my door there. I hope it's not too impactful. But yes, you are at the table with them. However, you're not allowed to provide any, I don't think coaching is the right word for it. That's what they call it. So that's what I call it, because that's the word. But I think coaching gives people this idea that you are able to sort of advise. But that's absolutely not the case. So when you're coaching at the event, you're basically, there's very limited things you're allowed to say to the player. And there's very limited things they're able to say to you. You're not allowed to be like, oh man, move these guys over there and do this, or make sure you do that don't forget your objectives, or you've left a hole over here, they could get in behind you. Like, you're not allowed to say anything of the sort. Essentially, on the day, the coach is the main thing that they are able to communicate is sort of projected scores. So you got 8 players. Let's say you got 8 players and you've only got one coach, right? And you do your pairings exercise. You figure out who's going to play against who, and then the coach sets up the tables for everybody, that sort of stuff, so that everybody's good to go. And then the coach can then essentially ask each player, do you think you're going to win the game? Like, how much are you going to win by? Are you going to get a really high score? Is it going to be like a small win? Like, how do you think you're going, right? Because that's not going to impact their decisions or anything like that. Like, you're not giving them any information, right? You're just asking. And then you can relay that information to other players. So, for example, you might have one player who's like, I'm going to absolutely crush this opponent. I'm going to get a massive win. So then you can go to your other players and you can say, old mate over there is going to get a massive win. So you don't need to stress too much. Just play conservatively and don't get a massive loss. It's okay if you get a small loss because he's going to get a massive win. So just play conservatively and don't, do anything too aggressive or too risky, right? So that's the main piece of information that you're allowed to relay between the players. And that actually plays a pretty big role in the way that the team will perform, because if you're doing that, the players are able to basically modify their tempo to achieve a team goal. And that's what Team 40K is all about. It's not enough to just have the 8 best players. That's great, but you need 8 players that are going to work together towards a team goal. And being able to modify your tempo is a big part of that. So, for example, if that first player, instead of saying, oh, I'm going to get a huge win, if he said, I'm getting crushed, like, he went first, he hit me, I failed a bunch of my saves, I've lost my key units, I'm going down, and I'm going down hard. There's nothing I can do to turn this game around. This guy's going to get a huge win, right? And then you go to another player and he says, oh, things are a bit up in the air at the moment, it could go one way or it could go the other. You might tell that person, okay, cool, well, so-and-so over there, he's getting crushed. So you actually need to get a big win, otherwise we're going to lose. So you need to take risky plays in order to make it a big win, because if you just get a small win, we lose. So if you get a small loss, we lose. But if you can turn it into a big win, then we win. So then you can communicate that to the person, and then they might go, okay, cool, I've got this squad of, whatever that's got a bunch of las cannons. Normally I would fire all of my las cannons into that one vehicle and just kill it. But because I know I need to turn this into a big win, I'm actually going to split my fire, put 2 las cannons into that and 2 into that, and hope that they spike high on the damages and they fail their saves, and then I kill both of those things. It's a risky play, but if it pays off, it's going to be a big advantage to me, and then I'm going to get a big win, which means I can offset his big loss, which means we're now in the running for a win, right? Whereas if he's going for a big win, you'd be like, cool, just kill that one thing. Don't split your fire, don't take any risks. You don't need to take risks. So that's the sort of the concept of what the coach can do on the day. But in terms of I think the part of the reason why they call it a coach is because it's almost more like a fitness coach in a way, where if you say you're a premium athlete, you might have a fitness coach, and they're there to help you train and prepare for the big event. But when they're at the big event, all they can really do is cheer you on. They can't actively engage. They can't tell you, when to jump if you're doing hurdles or fucking whatever, right? They can just sort of watch. But they still perform in a coaching capacity in that they help you prepare for the big event. And that's sort of what the 40K coach at a team's event sort of does. They don't really engage within strategy. One of the other things that they can do is, for example, when we're at the hotel and we're putting together a strategy on how we want to face these other teams, and who's going to be good into who's going to play against what, that sort of part of the strategy. The coaches can play a pretty heavy role in that. We can do a lot of the strategy stuff. We can do a lot of the like the planning and that sort of stuff. And that's also really rewarding and also really valuable to the team. It allows the team to make sure that they're really kicking ass and firing on all pistons. And that's something that Team Australia has done particularly well in the past, and is something that I intend to, really focus on and continue to improve on this year as captain for Team Australia, because Team Australians, we have a very tight sort of community, despite the fact that we're such a massive landmass. Like, there's people that would have to take a 6-hour flight to get from one part of Australia to the other, which is almost unheard of. Like, it's kind of like one side of the states to the other, right? The difference is there's nothing in between. Whereas in the States, there's all kinds of shit. But as a result, we when we do see each other, it's like catching up with a mate you haven't seen for 6 months. Like it's really high energy and exciting, and that's one of the parts that I've really enjoyed about the teams event. So we've got a bunch more comments there, so maybe I need to speed my responses up and waffle a little bit less, perhaps. But I hope that was Canton. I hope that answered your question. And if you want to know more, just keep hitting up that chat, and we can keep talking. The next question was the differences between teams and singles, as I'm pretty new. There's 4 more comments after that, so I'm going to give it an abridged version of this. I'm going to give a brief sort of answer. Then I'm going to read these other comments, and then I might come back to this, because this is a topic that I'm really, really passionate about. Now, Teams 40K, it can be done in a number of formats, right? You can have teams of 8 players, you can have teams of 2 players, you can have teams of 4 players, 5 players, any number of players, right? But basically, the way that the teams format works is you get your score. Like let's say you and me are on a team together, and we're playing against some other blokes, right? You get your score, I get my score, we add that together, and if that score beats the scores of our opponents, we win the round, right? So you might lose, but only lose by 3 or 4 points, and I might win, but win by 15 points, and as a result, our combined score is bigger than theirs, so we win the round. And this sounds really simple, but it does a few really massive things for the quality of life in the game. And then the other element is that, generally speaking, in teams events, and obviously there's a billion different formats for teams events, everywhere that does teams events does it differently. But generally speaking, you can't take the same faction twice. So if you've got a team of 5 players, you can't just run 5 Eldar lists, right? You have to run a different faction per player. And this serves a really, really important element, and that is that it actually forces balance in the meta to a degree. Because let's say Eldar so when we went to Mechelen for the recent World Team Championships in August, that was like at the peak of Eldar bullshit. Eldar were ridiculously strong. And any singles tournament, almost every singles tournament was won by an Eldar player. And if you went to a singles tournament, there was going to be half the field were going to be Eldar players, and you were going to have to verse Eldar over and over and over in order to win, right? Which is boring as hell and not engaging or fun or exciting, particularly for people who don't have an Eldar army and don't play Eldar, right? So, whereas what Team Event does is it goes, hang on, only 1 in 8 players can be Eldar. Every team will probably have an Eldar player, but 1 Eldar player per team. And that means that the rest of the team, you're going to pick somebody who's going to be your Eldar player, and then the rest of the team are going to be forced to try to find the next best faction, and then the next best faction. So you might go, cool, we've got an Eldar player, then you go, cool, next we've got a Genestealer Cult player, right? That was probably the next best faction. Then people will be like, cool, now we've got a Custodes player. They were really hot at the time. But then you start getting down into the list where you're like, well, I mean, Thousand Suns are pretty good. Are they in the top 8? Like, you end up starting to play with those factions that aren't oppressively overpowered. And that forces, like, some of the less powerful factions to be in the game, and then you can play around with the pairings to maybe get your less powerful factions into theirs and your OP factions into theirs, or you can specifically tool your armies so that your less powerful factions have particular units in them that are really effective against the top tier factions and try to pair that way. There's tons of really interesting things that you can do. Whilst talking about pairings, so for those of you who don't know, that the way that the pairings works in teams is basically, it'll vary, again, disclaimer, it'll vary from event to event, but generally speaking is each captain will put up one person who is the defender, right? And then each captain then picks 2 of their remaining lists to attack that defender. So they might put up their Eldar and we go, cool, we're going to put in our Knights and our Genestealer cult. Then that Eldar player gets to pick who they verse out of the Knights or the Genestealer cult, and then they go off and have a game. And this dynamic basically means that you can try to facilitate situations where you get the matchups that you want, right? You might go, cool, let's make a list that's really good at blowing up vehicles, and then if they put up their Imperial Knights list, we're going to put in our anti-tank thing and something else, and that way they're not going to pick the anti-tank thing because they know it's going to blow all their knights off the table, which means they're going to pick this one. So we essentially get to choose that matchup, right? And there's literally dozens and dozens and dozens of really cool tricks that you can do with this, because then you start to get into the realm of like predicting what you think they're going to think you're going to do, and then do certain things in order to make it so that, oh, you thought I was going to do this. I knew you thought I was going to do this. So I did something else, and that threw your game plan off. So it's actually like a really sick little mini game in itself that's really, really fun and really, really rewarding. And then basically once you've gone through that pairings exercise and everybody's gone off, they then go and play their games. And like I said, then it's the combined score of all of the players on this team versus the combined score on all the players of that team determines the winner. And what this pairings exercise does that I think is worth mentioning here, which is really, really good for competitive 40k, is it means that you can actually bring sort of more skewed lists that have a particular vulnerability, because you can use the pairings exercise to dodge that vulnerability. So for example, you might bring a World Eaters list and you might be like, as long as they don't have transports, I'm pretty happy. I can beat most things. If they have a whole bunch of transports, it's hard because I'm mostly combat, which means I hit them, I pop the transport, I don't kill the threats, then their threats kill me. So if they have transports, it's a problem, but as long as they don't, I'm pretty happy, right? And then you basically just go, cool, put me up, and if they put in 2 things, I'll take whichever one has fewer transports. Which means you can write a World Eaters list that has literally no guns and be happy with it. Whereas if you take a World Eaters list with no guns to a singles event, because you have 0 agency on who you verse, that's a really risky move, because if you get paired into somebody who has transports, your kind of event is just ruined. It's game over, right? So that's that's sort of a TLDR of why that pairings element is really important. The next part about teams events that's really, really important is that no individual player ever loses a game, right? Because it's the combined scores of your team versus the combined scores of theirs. So you can lose your game and still win the round, and therefore proceed on to the next round. Now, what this does is twofold. One, it means that the games that you win, you feel like you kind of won twice, because you won as an individual, but you also helped your team win the round. So you feel like you've done a favor to everyone, you've done this heroic deed by winning this game. That's really rewarding and really satisfying. But simultaneously, what it does is it means that you can lose a game, but still make it through the next round, so your losses are not as bad. And then also, if you're playing against a team that has, they might have a particular boogeyman list that everybody on your team is just like, none of us can beat that, right? That might be like, to use the previous version, it might be some ridiculous Eldar list that has, a couple of Wraith Knights and a bunch of Wraith Guard and, the Yinkan, and you're just like, yeah, that list is it's bonkers. Nobody on our team can reliably beat that. So you might be what we call thrown under the bus, which is where you're like, okay, cool, well, looking at the rest of the scores, you're not that useful to us in all of these other games, so we're going to throw you under the bus. We're going to pair you into that Eldar. They're going to pick you, and they're going to beat you. But that's okay. That's part of our overall game plan, is for you to go in there, try to get as many points as you can, because you're contributing to the team still, but it's okay for you to lose that game, because doing that is going to let all these other players win their games, and as a result, our team is going to win, and therefore you win. So you get these scenarios where it's like losing is actually okay. You know, losing your individual game is okay. It's not something to be concerned about or upset about. And that element of the game, to me, it really does go a long way to making teams way more exciting. So you've got the combination of the minigame pairing strategy, you've got the combination of having to take 8 different factions, which means that you're going to have a more diverse and spread out meta. You've got the ability to take more skewed lists because you have the agency in your pairings. You have your wins being worth more to you than a normal singles event win. And you have your losses less devastating than a regular singles loss. So there's so many reasons why Teams 40k is just so much better than singles that it's got me in a position where literally I've just come back from coming second at the Victorian Team Championships, which was a 5-man teams. I've been the captain of Victoria for the 8-man ANZ TC for several years, and then I participated in the Team Australia for WTC, and now I'm captain of Team Australia for WTC because Teams has just completely revolutionized the way that I view 40k. There's also the element that you're often going to be on a team with players that are very, very good if you get in the a lot of the right circles, and as a result, you learn a lot. A lot of my success in 40k I can directly attribute to the fact that there was one year, about 6 years ago now, where I was relatively new to the tournament scene. Nobody really knew who I was, and I wasn't getting any particularly good results. But I was getting good enough results, and I was good mates with some people that I'd met at tournaments that were getting really good results, and they were part of Team Victoria. And they had a few people drop out, and they needed people to step in. So I stepped in to play for Team Victoria, and got really, really tight friendships developed there with top tier players in my state. And that skyrocketed me from where I was in terms of competitive 40k all the way to the top of my state, and now to a position where I'm amongst the elite within my country. And that's all thanks to Team 40k. Could not have done that if it was just singles the whole time, because singles kind of turns everybody at the tournament into your adversary, right? Even your close mates that you probably practice with regularly, at a singles event, they're your adversary, they're your opponent, right? Whereas Teams really does create this camaraderie and this friendship that that completely revolutionizes the way that the game is played and the way that tournament is experienced. So that's why I'm just like, Team 40k, every team event, sign me the fuck up, because it's so much fun. It's amazing. All right, we've got some other comments here. So that was Nikki Collin. Cool. Robin Bate. I still have my old worldies from 8th edition. Should I change to the new ones? I also have my old Khorne Berserkers. I've actually, the camera right in front of me is actually propped up on some boxes of World Eaters because I needed it to be a little bit higher, of the new Khorne Berserkers. And I bought them with the intent of updating, but I have behind me in that cupboard there, I have 100 fully painted, fully WYSIWYG, good to go Khorne Berserkers, and I just can't bring myself to repaint and rebuild, another 20, 30 Khorne Berserkers when I have 100 finished, right? So I bought these ones, and I'm probably actually going to do a raffle, so keep your eyes peeled for that. I'm going to probably do a raffle where I'm going to give those away, because I bought them with the intent of using them as part of my collection, but I think my collection is big enough, and I feel like I probably don't need them. So I want them to go to a good home, somebody who's going to appreciate and love them. With that being said, though, the new models are really, really cool. The poses on them, they're way more dynamic, they're way more interesting. So if I didn't already have 100, I probably would be pivoting to the new models. And then, of course, the Exalted 8-bound, the 8-bound, the Lord Invocatus, Angron, the rest of the new range, the Jackals, they're all really, really good. So the Jackals I also didn't end up doing because I have 180 cultists, which I've just converted 20 of them to look more like jackals, like giving them chain blades and things of the like. But I already have all those guys, so I didn't end up buying any jackals, because it's like when you already have 180, which I actually bought for that very first teams event, by the way, that one when I said that I was called in last minute. One of the things that they needed was, this was back in early 8th edition. And basically they needed somebody to run like 200 cultists and Abaddon, because that list used to be really, really powerful. And I was like, I can build 200 cultists. So I literally went on eBay and just bought, and then just had 200 cultists in front of me. And then I sat down over a couple of weeks and painted 200 cultists. It was an absolute fucking slog, but that's where those cultists came from. So it's like, I'm not going to go out and redo that when there's plenty of other things to do, like getting all the 8-bound ready and those sorts of things. Perhaps if, like, once the 8-bound are all done, if I don't have any other projects like this on the go, perhaps then I'll look into updating that sort of stuff. But I'm sort of heading towards a direction of having 3 of everything World Eaters. So I've currently got 3 Defilers new on sprue, just sitting over on the corner there. They're going to be my next project after this. Even though Defilers are rubbish right now, they're really not very competitively viable. I think having 3 of them just on the shelf behind me, so that when we get balanced data slate update and they go down 30 points and all of a sudden Defilers are very good because they bring some necessary shooting into the World Eaters list, like then it's like, well, cool, I've got 3 of them, good to go, let's lock it in, right? So there's a few things like that where basically I'm focusing exclusively on World Eaters, and my plan is to just get it so that I have 3 of every option. Which, to be fair, I'm pretty close to doing so. Yep, so that's the question about the old World Eaters. What do we got here? John Spain. I just started building World Eaters. What do you think about the Land Raider to bring a unit of Exalted and a unit of 8-bound to the front? So one of the things about the Land Raider that's quite interesting is it's very terrain dependent, and which means if there's really heavy terrain on your table, there's lots and lots of ruins, lots of walls, lots of stuff like that. The Land Raider can be really tricky to maneuver because they're quite big. I've got 3 of them that I really want to use because they're this really cool custom 3D print design that looks absolutely amazing, and I put a lot of effort into painting them, but unfortunately I don't really think that the Land Raider is viable. I think in your example there where you're talking about it using the Land Raider to get the Exalted 8-bound and the 8-bound to the front, if the tournament you're playing at has enough terrain, you can kind of, and the 8-bound are fast enough, you can kind of just jump from terrain piece to terrain piece, and if you have Lord Invocatus to get scout moves on your Exalted 8-bound, or you just got your regular 8-bound with their scout move, then the 3 inches you gain from disembarking out of a Land Raider before charging doesn't really matter so much because you can scout move 6, whereas if you start in the Land Raider, you can't scout move. One of the things I was doing with pretty good success with the Land Raider is you'd park it somewhere hidden, right? So your opponent can't blow it up turn 1. And then you put your 8-bound in front of it, 6 inches, or like 9 inches in front of it. So your Land Raider is like behind a ruin somewhere in your backfield, and then your 8-bounder in front of it. And then this was particularly good when Guard Indirect was really, really powerful, because what you'd do is if your opponent won the roll and got the first turn, you would use your pre-game scout move to embark back in the Land Raider, because to scout move you essentially make a normal move. If you end a normal move within a range of a transport, you can embark in it. And that way, if you go first, you can scout move forward and then go in and charge and do your damage. But if they go first and they're going to threaten your 8-bound with indirect shooting, or even direct shooting for that matter, you could then scout move back, embark in the transport, and now you've got this Land Raider that's out of line of sight, and most indirect is not going to be able to effectively kill a Land Raider that you can't see. And that way you're able to then, in the subsequent turns, disembark, gaining that extra 3 inches, and then go in and do your damage in subsequent turns. So that's really good. The other thing is that the 8-bound is so fast, the assault ramp on the Land Raider is kind of wasted, right? Because they move 9 inches, the Land Raider moves 10. And you can't advance and then disembark from the Land Raider. You have to make a normal move and then you can disembark. So I found that the Land Raider didn't increase the speed of the 8-bound enough for it to be worth it. Whereas Terminators is a different story. I actually think there is room, there is a world where Land Raiders full of Terminators for World Eaters is not laughably bad. Like it's. I don't think it's going to be, winning any GTS or anything. Um, but I think it's interesting, and I think those Terminators, they hit pretty hard. The World Eaters ones. The fact that they can advance and charge means that they're pretty fast, all things considered. And the 6-up Feel No Pain is actually surprisingly relevant on 3 wound models, because if somebody hits you with a 3 damage attack, there's a 50% chance that you're going to deflect that, because if those 3 dice, you roll one of them as a 6, which you've got a 50% chance of doing, that 3 damage shot doesn't kill you, and they have to hit you with another 3 damage shot. So you have a 4-up invulnerable save to knock away half of the shots, and then you have essentially another 50% chance of knocking away that shot, which makes those Terminators surprisingly tough. So I don't hate the Land Raider with the Terminators, but I feel like 8-bound are fast enough that it kind of makes it a bit redundant. The other thing is that the Land Raider does provide some shooting, which is something that World Eaters sorely lack. But I think just a couple of las cannon shots with no ability to get rerolls on them, no ability to get sustained hits or anything like that on the las cannons. It feels bad. It just feels like sure, sometimes you're going to be able to hit something and blow it up, but if you can't reliably blow up a Rhino, then I feel like it's not enough shooting. And if you want to go, cool, well, I guess we have 2 Land Raiders then, so that between the 2 of them we can blow up a Rhino. It's like, yeah, but now you got a quarter of your army is fucking Land Raiders. Like, that's not a World Eaters army. If you're gonna run an army where most of it is Land Raiders, you're probably better off running Chaos Space Marines, or even, dare I say, Loyalists. So I don't know about the Land Raiders. I think they're obviously a very, very cool model. They're one of my favorites. And with Terminators, they provide, if you're going to try to get utility out of a Land Raider, the best way to do that is with Terminators, because Terminators benefit the most from the Land Raider. But I think I'd rather just 8-bound on foot and Berserkers in Rhinos than Terminators in a Land Raider. Is sort of my take on that. So yeah, I hope that's not too doom and gloom for you, but yeah, unfortunately I don't think the Land Raider is where it's at. The next question we got here is from Marshall Bloggins. Your trading units video was on point, mate. What do your current take all comers list look like? What do you think upcoming data slate is going to look like? Okay, this is good. This is a good question. So there's seems to be a convergence in the World Eaters community on a particular style of list. And I think that's for good reason. There's some real standout units in the World Eaters right now. But I also think there's some units that are being slept on potentially that are very, very close to competitively viable that people could definitely consider as well. So my current list is Angron. I think he's a must take. Then you've got Khan. I think he's also pretty close to a must take because he's just so cheap, reliable, and high quality for his points. Then what I've been running, which is a slight detour from the general consensus on the world, is I've been running 2 Masters of Executions. Most people run one of them with the Berserker's Glaive, which is somebody I've been running since the start of 10th edition. I ran him at the singles event for the World Team Championships back in August. I've been running him pretty much the whole time. He's an absolute murderer. I call him Murder Mo, and he's fantastic. But then the other one that I've been running is a Master of Executions with the Favored of Khorne relic, which allows you to reroll your blessings. Now, a lot of people have been running that relic on a Juggernaut, on a World Eaters Lord on Juggernaut. But I've been running it on a Master of Executions for a specific reason, and that is that I run 2 units of 10 Khorne Berserkers. There's lots of people out there that'll run no Khorne Berserkers. There's lots of people out there that'll run just 1 unit of 10 or a couple of units of 5. I know Anthony Vanella from Art of War, he's been having a lot of success running 1 unit of 10 and 1 unit of 5. But I've found that often the games that I won, I could attribute to the Khorne Berserkers. So basically what I did is I started writing lists that had 2 units of 10. One unit would be positioned front in a rhino and able to launch out attacks, and then the other unit would sort of slowly work its way around a flank or defend my home. And the idea with them is when you have a Master of Executions in those units, which is why I take 2, that gives them access to always fights first, which is really, really effective, because if you have a unit of Berserkers that are not in a rhino, they're just out of line of sight on a ruin somewhere, holding an objective, it's really hard for your opponent to take that, because they can't shoot you, because they can't see you, and they can't charge you, because if they charge you, you fight first and kill them, right? So that makes it really hard for people to sort of deal with that unit. And a lot of the time I find when you win games, it's because you presented your opponent with no good options. And I feel like the Berserkers do that really, really well. One of the other things that they do really, really well is when you do send them in, you can go, the Berserkers are going to go in, they're going to charge a whole bunch of stuff and tag it, and then your opponent's like, okay, if I stay in combat, the Berserkers are going to fight first and kill me. So if I fall back and then try to shoot them, generally they're falling back no more than 6 inches, right? Which means if they shoot at you and don't kill you, you're going to be able to Blood Surge move back into combat again and tag them again. And that is so powerful. So one of the ways that you can make sure that that's more likely to go off is when you charge things, you position yourself so that, like, say their unit's here. I don't know if this works. Say their unit is here. You go, okay, I'm going to put one Berserker here, one here, one here, one here, and one here. So they can still fall out that way, but their movement of 6 inches only gets them about 4 inches away from those models on the sides. And as a result, when they go to shoot you, you only need to roll a 3 with your Blood Surge move in order to get back into combat with them. So being able to do positioning tricks like that with the Berserkers, and now you put your opponent in a position where they're like, wow, if I can't kill that entire unit of Berserkers in a single activation, I basically can't shoot it at all. Because if they shoot it once and kill 2 Berserkers, then you Blood Surge move and the remaining 8 get into combat. It's a massive problem for them. So this is where Berserkers really do shine, and they really do flip matchups. The best way to beat Berserkers is just to have something that's really, really tough, because the problem with Berserkers is they're only AP 1 for the most part. So if you have access to Armor of Contempt, which there's a lot of that out there in the meta right now, like the Berserkers, they could charge you into Terminators and only kill like one of them. Because you just go, cool, Armor of Contempt, I'm getting my 2-up saves regardless, and the Berserkers just don't kill anything. So that's the problem with Berserkers, but that's where the rest of my list comes into it, and that is I've got 3 units of 3 Exalted 8-bound, 1 unit of 3 regular 8-bound, a Rhino, and a unit of 10 Jackals. And basically the Jackals are just there to hold, sticky your home objective, and then sort of move out towards the midfield throughout the game, or screen out your backfield, or do secondaries, or that sort of stuff. And then the 8-bound are there to, generally, I'm going to rapid ingress 1 unit of Exalted 8-bound, and then the other 2 are going to get the scout move from Lord Invocatus. Not sure if I mentioned him, but I have Lord Invocatus as well. So the scout move from Lord Invocatus is generally going to go on the Exalted 8-bound, and then the regular 8-bound can scout as well, and Invocatus can scout himself. So you're going to be able to go, cool, there's like 4 units that are going to get into really good positions. And then basically what I do is the 8-bound take out anything that the Berserkers are not good into, Angron takes out anything that the 8-bound are not good into, and then the Berserkers just win the game. So the Berserkers go in, they hold the objectives, they secure the board, they put your opponent in these really tricky positions, and meanwhile, Angron and the 8-bound sort of facilitate that. That's kind of how it works. Not exactly, but more or less that's the game plan. And then you obviously have to change that game plan up depending on what your opponent has and what they do. But that's generally the way that I approach it with my current list. Your next question is on the balanced data slate. Now this is interesting. So there was a comment made by Games Workshop over on their community, the Warhammer community page, where they spoke about the data slate, and they basically said that going forward, they're pretty happy with the overall balance between factions. So their focus is going to shift to being more about internal balance within the index and codex books, right? Which is really it's very positive, and hopefully that they don't fuck this up, which it's GW, they probably will. But that's a really good sign. And what that means is hopefully they'll take things like, for example, the Helldrake, right? The Helldrake is rubbish. It's way too expensive and for what it does, because it's not very effective at shooting or fighting, and it has very low OC. I think it might even be OC 0. Might be OC 1 or 2 or something like that, right? So the Helldrake is not good at capturing objectives. It's not really good at killing things. It's not really good at, shooting things or tying things up, or like, what is it good for? Not much. So, but it's 200 points or something like that. So it's like, for the same amount of points, you could get, a unit of 10 berserkers. Like, that's way better, because that's OC 20. That's, the ability to blood surge move, the ability to charge through walls, like, so many things. So I think with the balanced data slate, we're going to see things like the Helldrakes go down in points to make them more viable. And we're going to see things like probably the 8-bound probably going to go back up a little bit. Not a lot, but up a little bit. And we're probably going to see Angron go up a little bit. Basically, all of the units that I listed that are in my current force, I could see an argument for why they should go up a little bit. And obviously, in order for that to make sense, every army would have to have the same treatment. So like all the things in Chaos Space Marines that are really popular right now, like Chosen and Chaos Lords and Cursed Cultists and Warp Talons, all of those things would also need to go up a little bit. Or what I would like to see as well is instead just have the things that are not being selected right now go down in points. So don't change the things that are already being selected, keep them as they are, but just make it so that all the things that we're currently not taking go down. The interesting thing, and personally, I don't like this new method of balancing the game where GW are basically just going, cool, we're just going to use points costs to fix things, because I don't think that really works. And the reason I don't think that works is because in order for a points cost to change to be actually relevant, it almost needs, especially when you're comparing faction to faction, is it needs to be enough of a difference that you get an additional unit, right? So for example, if Berserkers went up or down 1 point, it's like, cool, well, if you had 2 units of Berserkers in your army, cool, you've got an extra 20 points. But because of the way that 10th edition works, you can't buy a unit for 20 points. So if they all go down a point, and you go, cool, I got an extra 20 points in my list, it actually doesn't change anything. It's actually exactly the same, right? So in order for it to work, you need to get enough points reductions across the board that you go, cool, each Helldrake went down 30 points, but also each Molophine went down 10 points, and the Berserkers went down 1 point per model, and that means that across all of those sweeping changes, I have enough points to get a second Helldrake, or something like that, right? Then we're starting to talk about something that's going to have an impact. But I don't think that that's going to really work, because then you're talking about like massive points reductions across a lot. And if one of the ways that they manage this is to have some things go up and some things go down, I don't know, I just don't see, I feel like that's going to be very difficult for them to manage. Whereas if they had just said, cool, like you have to buy your plasma pistols and stuff, well now you can go, cool, well the Berserkers have gone down in points, so now I can get plasma pistols and bring them back up to the same amount of points, but the unit just got more effective, right? And that way, instead of just changing the value of the unit, you're actually changing its effectiveness. Or if instead they went, okay, cool, Berserkers, let's, instead of reducing their points cost, let's just make them AP2 now, right? If they did that, well now you're improving their effectiveness instead of just reducing the cost so that you can get more, because it doesn't really work, because you can't really get more unless you reduce the points massively. So that's sort of my gripe. And I know Auspex Tactics did a really good survey recently where he found that essentially it was like 68% of people are not happy with the points costs being the like free war gear and the squad sizes. So hopefully GW see that. And this is like it was something like 49% were unhappy, but then there was like 20% didn't care. So if you don't care, you're not actively happy, right? So it's something like 60 odd percent were not actively happy with those changes in the edition. And I was obviously in the camp of very unhappy with them. I think it's really bad game design. So hopefully GW witness that, and eventually we see a change there where war gear costs points, and instead of just paying 100 points for 5 berserkers and 200 for 10, it's just 20 points per berserker, and you can get as many as you want. Right? Well, you still have limits on how many, but not locked to 5 or 10. Just go, cool, well, I'm going to get 6 or 7. Because then it's like, oh, the berserkers went down in points, which means I can afford one more. And you can buy one more for the squad. And now that squad is actually more effective. So hopefully they listen to the community on that one. But I don't think we're going to see that in this data slate. I think that's probably something more where we're going to get like almost a 10.5 edition. Where they go, cool, we're not indexing everything this time. But it's a new, but it'll be somewhat of a new edition. And in that new edition, we'll have the same rules, the same way that from 8th to 9th edition you kept the same codexes and stuff, it'll all carried over. But they'll update some core rules, and I think at that stage, which this might be a year or two from now, at that stage they'll fix this, because I don't think it's having the desired effect. Their hope was that it would make list writing easier, but I don't know about you, but I find that it actually makes list writing harder, because you'll write a list and it comes at 2,005 points, and you're like, well, how do I spend that? How do I reduce the list by 5 points? I can't. There's no 5-point upgrade that I can drop, which means I have to drop an entire unit. But then I drop an entire unit, and now I'm 130 points under, and you can't spend 130 points because the cheapest unit is 135. So it's like, it becomes really clunky and annoying. So that's sort of where I'm at with the balanced data slate. I would really like to see that granular points cost come back. I don't think we're going to. But in the interim, I'd like to see things like the Helldrake become cheaper, things like the Predator. So like there's another thing that's really frustrating to me is that like the Predator Annihilator and the Predator Destructor for World Eaters cost the same or close enough to the same as they do for Chaos Space Marines. But the Chaos Space Marine ones are so much better, and World Eaters need good shooting way more. So it's this double down of bad, like feels bad, where the World Eaters, like they desperately need something that can provide shooting support. So, that's one element. But the Chaos Space Marines ones, they can get sustained hits on a 5+, which means that every las cannon shot has a 1 in 3 chance of becoming 2 hits. That's massive. And they also have access to the stratagem Dark Obscuration, where if it's a Nurgle vehicle, you can't shoot it. So in the shootout, that Predator is sitting in your backfield somewhere, just raining las cannon shots downfield, and your opponent can't respond unless they can get close to you. But in order to get close, they're gonna have to get through your accursed cultist and your chosen and all this sort of stuff. So for Chaos Space Marines, their Predator is so much better than the World Eaters one, but it costs the same points. That's frustrating. I would love to see the World Eaters Predator become a bit cheaper, so that you can go, cool, instead of just having a unit of Jackals sit on my home field for 75 points, maybe I spend 100 points and it becomes a Predator. It's like, it's still just going to hold my backfield objective, but it can now throw out some las cannon shots that are sometimes going to actually matter. They're actually going to mean something, and they're going to do something of value. And you're not expecting it to. It doesn't have to, because it's a cheap unit. It doesn't matter. If it's shooting las cannons all game and it fails to really do anything, it's like, cool, that's okay. It was only 30 points more than my Jackals, or it's 30 points more than that Rhino. Realistically, in a World Eaters list, I think a Rhino and a Predator should cost roughly the same points. because like they're both equally as tough. So they both control objectives as well as one another. The Predator has the advantage of being able to do direct damage. It has las cannons that can shoot downrange and blow things up. But the Rhino can hold Berserkers in it, which are one of the most valuable units in your army. They protect that unit and they create a force multiplier because they make that unit faster, they make that unit more durable, they allow you to do different tricks when it comes to piling in and consolidating and absorbing Overwatch and all sorts of really cool things. Rhinos are amazing in a Berserk World Eater's army. They're way better than a Predator, right? And yet the Predator costs like 65 points more, something ridiculous. So I really hope they address that with the balanced data slate. Same with the World Eater's Forge Fiend. It's like, why is it roughly the same points as a Chaos Space Marine 1 when the Chaos Space Marine 1 gets devastating wounds and has access to a stratagem for reroll all hits and wounds? Like, that's wild, you know? Or you take the Chaos Space Marine 1 as a Nurgle one, and it's like, well, now it has the ability to get sustained hits on a 5+ and not be able to be targeted. It's like, what? And that costs the same as ours? And all ours does is force you to take a battle shock test, which people always pass anyway, because most things are like, got really good leadership value. It's like, dumb. That really should be way cheaper. So I'd like to see the Forge Fiend for the World Eaters go down in points, and the Predator go down in points. Basically, all of the DACA, the shooting elements of the World Eaters, they all need to become way cheaper. And then the combat elements, as much as you don't want to change the... and this, to be fair, in GW's defense, this is tricky because you don't want to change the identity of the faction. You don't want to make Predators so cheap that everyone's just like, yeah, cool, you take 3 Predator Annihilators and 3 Predator Destructors in every World Eaters list because they're so cheap. You don't want to do that because that's not a World Eater. That's not how World Eaters should play, right? So you don't want to go too far, but I do think that balance is off at the moment. So I hope that answers those questions. What else we got? We've got 20 viewers at the moment, so that's fantastic. If any of you guys have anything you want to say, please keep hitting up the chat. I'm not sure how to fucking scroll. I've got a mouse over here. Is there more comments in there? I think that's up where we're at with comments. So we've got Kenton saying very informative. You're welcome. We got Ethan Butler. How do you deal with Black Templars? Okay, I actually haven't versed Black Templars yet. But I think my approach to them would be very similar to my approach versus Chaos Space Marines. Because I feel like they've very obviously got a lot of different things going on for them. And again, it depends on what's in the Black Templars list as to how I verse it. But basically, that's going to be a sort of a combat on combat style matchup. And I assume when you ask how do I deal with it, you're talking about with my World Eaters. I can give you a response from the Chaos Space Marine perspective as well if you'd like. But basically, this is where the Khorne Berserkers really shine in these sorts of matchups. Because the Black Templars, when they charge me, I'm going to fight first and probably kill a bunch of them. So basically what I'd do is I'd put my Exalted 8-Bound in Deep Strike. I'd put Khan in the Rhino with a unit of 10 Berserkers and Master of Execution in the Rhino because they can support 12. So they would be in there, and they would deploy, sort of front and center, knowing that the Black Templars are not likely, depending on their list, of course, and depending on the terrain. I'd try and deploy that Rhino where it can't be directly shot, which means they're not going to be able to shoot that Rhino, and those Berserkers are positioned forward. So that way, if I get first turn, I can disembark out 3. I can then move 8 inches if I use the Blessings of Khorne to get +2 to the move. So I'm moving out 11 inches. Then I can auto advance 6 inches to go 17 and then charge and try and hit something. And then put myself in a position where they're, like I said before, they're not going to be able to effectively kill me in a single volley. They're not going to be able to charge me because if they charge me, I fight first. And they're not going to be able to do anything. So that puts those Berserkers in a really commanding position. And this is one of the main things that the Berserkers are good for. It's why I bring 2 units of them, because then even if they do find a way to deal with that one unit, I can then just throw another unit in their face and do the exact same thing. So the Berserkers will be very, very good in that matchup. Angron will largely be there to take out any of their big things. And one of the main things that Angron does that I think people underestimate, though, is he's mainly there just to provide reroll hits to the Berserkers. Because those Berserkers, when they have sustained hits and reroll hits, they do so much damage that Angron's not really needed to be this big beat stick. He'll still kill one thing a turn, for sure. He'll charge something, kill it. No worries. But sort of his main utility comes in from the fact that he goes in somewhere, kills something, but he provides the rerolls to the Berserkers. And then your Berserkers do a lot of the heavy lifting. And people often underestimate the Berserkers. They often go, oh my god, 8-bound, and they go for the 8-bound. But those 8-bound are surprisingly tough. It takes a lot to put them down. And the amount of shooting and combat threats and whatever that you put into those 3 Exalted 8-bound could have killed the whole unit of 10 Berserkers. And that unit of 10 Berserkers is way scarier. Especially the one that has the Master of Executions with the Berserker Glaive. He is terrifying. I've seen him kill like Primarchs without breaking a sweat. He's really good. He'll kill a ton of Terminators. He's really critical in that matchup, actually, because if they're going to have Terminators and things of the like, then you really are going to want him going in, because when he gets that glaive, it's going to be doing 3 damage devastating wounds, because there's characters in the unit, so you're going to be going with reroll hits and wounds. That character on his own, that Master of Executions, he can kill 4 or 5 Terminators pretty easily. So, utilizing him and the Berserk as well will be the key to winning against Black Templars. But again, disclaimer, it depends on their list. One of the things that I have been doing a lot of lately is I've got a Patreon and a Discord server. And basically, if you want specific advice, if you join that, depending on the tier that you join, you can go, cool, here's my mate's Black Templars list, and here's my World Eaters list, and then I'll help you out, in the $100 a month tier, which I fully appreciate, that's a lot of money. But in that $100 a month tier, we do regular phone calls, probably once or twice a week. We'll do a phone call, and we just chat, and it can be from half an hour to an hour, and we just talk each week, multiple times, and we sort of share these sorts of ideas, and then we get feedback from those ideas, and then we share them again the following week. Or if you've got a tournament and you're like, cool, I'm going to this tournament next week, I'll help you write your list, I'll help you sort of strategize and come up with some ideas. And we just have really good banter and chats happening over in there. It's a really positive community. So if you want some more specific advice, then absolutely feel free to jump in on that. I'm just going to check. It looks like it's been a while since anybody's commented, so I just want to make sure that the stream is still working. And make sure that we're all good. Because, like I said, when it comes to technology, I'm fucking useless. Oh, yeah. So, yeah, it looks like there have been some more... there's been shitloads more comments that are not showing on my laptop. So, apologies if I've missed anyone. There's been a lot of stuff on here. Chaos Space Marine Dark Packs is strong right now and may get nerfed in the next balance round. Do you think GW will change Dark Packs? How do you think it could change, and how will that affect the Chaos Space Marine meta? That's a really interesting question. That's from Chaos Roomba. That's a really good question. So, I think Dark Pacts are almost the gold standard as far as I'm concerned in terms of army rules, because yes, they're very powerful. Being able to give your units access to lethal hits and sustained hits is very good. But the thing is they have the capacity to damage your models, right? So they're not OP in the way that it's not just free shit, right? Like I've seen plenty of people talk about situations where their Forge Fiend, it goes hazardous and it fails a couple of hazardous tests, and then it fails its Dark Pact, and it ends up doing more damage to itself than it did to the target, right? So I think Dark Pacts are really balanced and really fantastic, and I think that's one of the rare instances where GW has hit the nail on the head. Where I think they've fallen short, and where I think that the Dark Pacts should possibly change, is that when you have reroll hits, those Dark Pacts then become overpowered. So whether that be your undivided unit using the stratagem to get reroll hits and wounds, or whether that be through being within proximity to Abaddon the Despoiler, which gives you your access to your reroll hits, I think that's the problem. Because if you just get to roll your dice and it's like, cool, 1 in 3 shots are going to be a 6, or a 5 or a 6, and therefore I'm getting a 33% increase in my damage. That's really good, but you're also risking taking damage yourself, so it's what it is. But when you're also re-rolling, and you're like, cool, I'm going to roll these, 20 dice, and of those 20 dice, I'm going to roll 1 in 3, so I'm going to roll, like, say, 7, 5 or 6s, so I'm going to put them off to the side, and then I'm going to re-roll everything, not just my misses, I'm going to re-roll everything, right? And then of those remaining 14, I'm then going to get, like, another 5 exploding. So now I've got 7 plus the 5, I've got 13 5s or 6s, which means I get 13 additional hits. That's when it gets out of control, in my opinion. So I think what GW need to do to fix the Dark Pact situation is either change the way that the marks of Chaos work, so that they don't give you the sustained and lethal on 5+, or they just need to take all of the things in the book that currently give you your full rerolls to hit, and instead make them +1 to hit. And the reason that this works is because +1 to hit, when you're mostly hitting on 3s, +1 to hit or rerolls to hit is pretty similar, right? Because say you got 6 dice, right? If you're hitting on 3s, you're going to get 4 out of 6 hits, right? So you're going to get 2 misses. If you had +1 to hit, you'd be getting 5 out of 6, right? So you get 1 additional hit if you have +1 to hit. Whereas instead, if you have rerolls, you're going to reroll those 2 misses, and on average, you're going to turn one of those misses into a hit. So you're going to get 1 additional hit. So +1 to hit or rerolls to hit works out roughly the same mathematically, right? But what it doesn't do is the +1 to hit doesn't stack with your Dark Pacts and make them fucking bananas. So I think that the simple fix there is to go, cool, instead of Abaddon having a 6-inch aura of reroll hits, he has a 6-inch aura of +1 to hit. And then instead of the Dark Zealotry or whatever it's called, the stratagem that gives you your reroll hits, instead of that letting you reroll all your hits, it gives you +1 to hit. You can still have it reroll 1s if you're not undivided. But if you are undivided, instead of reroll 1s, you get +1. And I think that will make... Now, you still give it reroll wounds. I think reroll wounds is fine on that stratagem. But I think instead of the reroll hits, I think it should be the plus to hit. And I think that would go a long way to bringing that balance back. What were the other questions on there? Okay, so it's down here. Yeah, so basically that's the change that I would like to see. I don't know whether GW have the nuance to approach it in that respect. It's also worth noting, like you mentioned in here about the balanced data slate, Chaos Space Marine Codex isn't too far away. That was one of the ones that they sort of announced for the first half of the year. So it's not too far away. It could be, it could be within a couple of months, depending on where within that sort of lineup it lands. And when it comes out, that's going to be really interesting because, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the Chaos Space Marines army rule is Dark Pacts, and then the detachment rule is the Marks of Chaos, right? Which means when they do that, the detachments are there's going to be multiple detachments, and only one of those detachments is going to give you your critical hits on a 5+, right? All the other detachments are going to do something else. And if those detachments do something else, those detachments might not mesh as well with the Dark Pacts. And I think that in itself could go a long way to making the Dark Pacts a little bit more reasonable, right? Because if you're just Dark Pacting, but instead you've got like some kind of Alpha Legion inspired detachment, where it's like everything in your army gains Scout, right? That's bonkers. That's bananas. But it's nowhere near, the damage capacity is nowhere near as high. because you're no longer getting those sustained on a 5+. You're not getting those critical hits on a 5+, which means your damage output is way lower. So that creates some really interesting situations where those dark pacts become less powerful depending on the detachments that you take. So I don't think they'll do anything with the dark packs in the balanced data slate. At best, I think we could see a change to the way that the rerolls work, but most likely it'll be nothing, and they'll just use points costs to make units different. Because obviously some units benefit way more from dark pacts than others, right? Like there's some units out there that have very low volume of shots that benefit way less than something with high rolls, or something that has access to rerolls, or those sorts of things. So yeah, I don't think that the dark packs themselves are a problem. I think there's just a few like fine-tune opportunities that we can use to make them a little bit more balanced, I guess. But overall, I think that the dark packs are the gold standard. I think that's what more codexes should have, things similar to the dark pacts, where it's like it's got an advantage in the way that it dials up your damage, but it also comes at a potential detriment to yourself. How you going, guys? I am back. I'm assuming that Yep, I'm back now. Okay, apologies for that. The microphone went flat. Thank you very much to Matt Jackson and Mark Sampson for calling me and letting me know that the microphone had gone flat. Hopefully it hasn't been flat for too long. I've got two here, so I've cycled that one out. That one's now on the batteries. I really need to catch up with these comments so that if people comment saying your audio's dropped out, I can jump back in, because these wireless batteries are a thing. So anyway, I'm not sure where I dropped out, but basically we were talking about flyers and how they've been a really hard thing to balance in various editions. And I don't think GW have ever had flyers in a place where they were balanced. And I think that's just because fundamentally, one of the things about Warhammer is that it's a combat-heavy, futuristic shooting game, right? Like it's weird elements, right? And flyers really distort that, because you just can't have a world where blood crushers and flyers exist. They coexist. It doesn't work, right? And as a result, it's just really, really hard for them to balance that system. So I think your comment about how flyers have to be bad this edition, I think that's kind of just always going to be the case. They either have to be bad or overpowered. And one of the reasons that's even harder to balance is because most armies, like not every army has access to a good quality flyer. So it becomes this thing, if you go, cool, flyers are really, really powerful, certain armies are going to be like, yeah, but I don't have any flyers. Like, that sucks. Like demons, they just don't have flyers, right? Like, so they just get dominated by flyers, and you've got bloodletters and blood crushers running around just getting smacked silly. And all your opponent has to do is kill the bloodthirster, and now you can't hurt them, right? Like, that sucks. I think the closest they got was when they addressed the fact that they made it so flyers couldn't score objectives. And they also had an old boots on the ground rule where basically if you killed everything in their army except for their flyers, they were tabled, and the flyers would just die. That was the closest they got, because then, yes, flyers were really powerful, but they didn't help you score objectives, they didn't help you win the game, and they also were a liability in terms of surviving. So they had pros and cons. And realistically, in order to make something balanced, it needs to have, a good balance of pros and cons. And I think flyers is probably one of the hardest things for them to do that with. Super heavies are also obviously another example of something that's really hard for GW to balance. And I personally think the game was better before they included them. I remember when they first brought in the Imperial Knights, it was just like, what the fuck are you doing, Games Workshop? Like, how are Berserkers ever going to beat an army full of Chaos Knights or Imperial Knights? Like, it was dumb. And then they created this situation where it's like, okay, well, maybe we give them, like, reroll hits and reroll wounds and these things so that they can actually hurt the big things. But then you get these dumb situations where you've got Khorne Berserkers killing Knights, and it's like, that's stupid. It's like, you're solving the stupid situation with a stupid answer, and it's like, they just shouldn't be in the game, And, like, don't get me wrong, I love the aesthetic of Knights. I think they're a great collector's piece, and they make a great centerpiece for an army. I just don't think they should have ever been a standalone faction. I think they should have been always like, you can take a single Knight in an Imperial army, and a single Chaos Knight in an Imperial army. But they should have never been a faction where you take nothing but these big Knights. Same with, like, things like the Khorne Lord of Skulls. You should only be able to take one. Being able to take, like, I went to an event recently, Geelong Heresy, where I took 3 of them. And it was just, it almost felt rude, because, like, if I go first, I would just take out whatever the one thing in their army is that threatens the Lord of Skulls. And now they've got these toughness 13 monsters running around, and your opponent just can't deal with them. Unless they have very specific, dedicated, war gear. So, yeah, the flyers and the super heavies, I think, are a problem for competitive 40k. But, it is what it is, and the meta will eventually find a way to solve it. All right, let's have a look at some more questions here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll down, I'm going to read a bunch of comments, and then I'm going to cycle back and answer some of the interesting ones, because I want to make sure that I don't just get bogged on one question and then never get down to the rest. So, do you think Eldar will be at 59 or 60% win rate after the January balancing? That's a nice, easy, quick question. No, I think they'll probably get hit again and bring them down into parity with everybody else. We've got Insane for Rain. I miss rapier batteries for the World Eaters. I do too. I never actually got to put them on the table, but I actually designed a 3D print of a rapier battery. It was like a mini brass scorpion with the cannons on the back. It was sick as. I really enjoyed it. I printed a bunch, but by the time I'd printed them, built them, painted them, then they became not a relevant part of the game. So, yep, that sucks. Kenton Evans, obligatory, what do you want to see when the codex drops question? I like that question, but that's not a quick answer. So I'll bookmark that and we'll see. I might jump back to that one in a moment. 20 plus Black Templars mob was nuts. I went up against it with CSM, but was able to counterpunch them with Abby. That's fantastic to hear that Abby's killing those Templars, because fuck those guys. I'm just going to try and multitask. This is surprisingly difficult to do, to paint, drink, read comments, and talk to the camera simultaneously. I really need to get like one of my mates to come over and just, he can sit there with the comments and he can read them out to me. And then I'll answer them, and that way I can focus on just the drinking and painting part. That would be really cool. We might even do another live stream, because I've got a few mates coming over for drinks tonight. Maybe we'll do another live stream there. Hellglazer can't chat painting minis. Fantastic. Hey mate, if I can chat, if I can read, chat, paint minis, and drink whilst talking to you, surely you can chuck a comment in every 5 minutes and then go back to painting your minis. Unless you're trying to quote me there. Nikki Collin, if Weldy's got a small under 50 points unit, what would you want it to be? That's also a really good question, and I think I can answer that at the same time as answering the codex question. So we'll come back to that. Andrew Spence, just getting into 40k, chose CSM as my army. Your podcast has been a huge help to learning how to play the army. Thanks. You're welcome, and I'm glad you found the channel, and I'm glad you're enjoying it. And welcome to 40k, and welcome to Chaos. Electrosnow, I've rolled 3 ones on a Forge Fiend hazardous test, getting hot. Yeah, I've got one of the guys on my Patreon was telling me a story where he rolled 3 ones on his hazardous test, failed his Dark Pact, the Forge Fiend died in its first shooting activation. And it was a 3D printed one, so he just picked it up off the table and smashed it on the floor, because he was like, fuck that guy. I'll print a new one when I get home, but fuck that one specifically. Which is a story that I like telling often, because it's very funny. Any models I should hold off buying until the spring? Heard new or refreshed models are coming. I'm personally, I don't believe in really holding off. I believe just buy what you want to buy when you want to buy it, even if it's something that's not competitively viable, because you just never know. Things change so rapidly these days, with every 3 months getting a new balanced data slate and new points costs coming out. If there's a model that you like and you think it's cool, just buy it. And, you know, I've been holding off on buying new Berserkers and stuff for so long. But because there was rumors of new Berserkers coming out for like the last fucking 5 years. And you end up in this limbo state where you're just not buying anything, you're not engaging in the hobby that you love, because you've got this hypothetical potential future that you're waiting for. And then that future just, it might never arrive. And then you're stuck just not having progressed. So I say, just if there's something you like, there's an army you want to build, just buy it and build it and take it from there. Because you never know. Like, for example, they're already re-releasing the Deathwing Knights again, even though they just had new models not too long ago, while there's other units and other models that haven't been updated. Like, the Defiler model is ancient and hideous. Why are they re-releasing a new model for other shit? They should be re-releasing a new Defiler that's more in line with the Mauler Fiend, Forge Fiend sort of aesthetic. Anyway, yeah. So I wouldn't stress about that. Then we've got, they could always do what they did to Necrons and completely gut the index detachment. That's very true when talking about Chaos Space Marines and what happens with the Dark Pacts. It's entirely possible that they just flip the whole thing on its head, and the index detachment that we're familiar with is just not a thing anymore, and they completely change the way that the faction works. I think that's actually probably the most likely scenario, to be honest. And like you say, they just did that with Necrons, so it wouldn't be out of character. I think that's probably what they're going to do, is when the Chaos Space Marine Codex comes out, the Dark Pacts will be completely flipped on their head. And maybe the Marks of Chaos will be the army rule, and that'll give you something real basic. And then the Dark Pacts will be one of the detachments, and then there'll be other detachments that'll have other things. Maybe. Then we have some very disappointing comments about how the audio has cut out, and for that I do apologize. This happens every time I do a live stream because, like I said, I'm trying to juggle painting, reading comments, drinking, fucking talking to you guys, and I've got my microphone in front of me right here with the blue lights. That means my audio's active. And I've also got on the screen there a little thing that's showing me, so there's multiple prompts that should let me know that it's time to change the microphone out, but, you know, juggling is hard. So thank you very much for those comments, because that obviously helped me identify that I needed to change the microphone, because apparently I need a fourth input to prompt me that I've fucked up. So yeah, thanks for those comments, and I do apologize. I got Marshall blogging saying that I need to check the chat more just in case to prevent something like this. Just like checking your mirrors when you drive. All valuable chat being launched into silent, never to be observed. So it pains my soul. I wish I could text the guy or something. I do appreciate that, and like I said, I do apologize. I try to check all these sorts of things, but you know, it's hard. And if I was smart, I would buy a new microphone specifically for live streaming that is just plugged into the computer so that it doesn't go flat. Which, you know, if I do these live streams more often, that's something I'll definitely look into. The only reason I haven't done that yet is because the microphones that I've got are relatively good quality and they're wireless, which means they're great for battle reports, which is the main reason I got them, because you can be walking around the table and the microphone's right next to you, so you get premium audio without having cords running everywhere. And live streams is something I'm only sort of just dipping my toe in and playing around with a little bit, so it's not something that I'm prepared to invest hundreds of dollars into buying a plug-in microphone. But if this sort of thing is something that people enjoy, then, and you know, therefore it's content that I can do more regularly, then it's definitely something I'll look into, and then this just won't be a problem anymore. So appreciate your patience with that and your understanding, and I also appreciate the people who called me. I've got a few people obviously tuning in that have my personal number, so that is also very appreciated, because that allowed me to get this channel back on track, this conversation back on track. Mr. OK said that in chat no one can hear you scream. That's funny. We've got a few people noticing that I'm back. Okay, so we're about 5 minutes out. That's okay. It cut off during my dark packs. Any thoughts on the new Clear Ruins footprints? I played against Train Layout 4, and it was uber line sight blocking. The entire Necron, Vault, and Silent King was hiding in the corner. Then what else we got? We've got... I'm just going to read a few more things. So, haha, you paint, drink, read, comments, fire it up. That's crazy. The guy smashed the 3D printing forge feed, wow. And then CSM probably won't get much new stuff. Necron's players hope for a new Catan refresh, and we got a War Gear Overlord. So I'll touch on a few of these quick ones. So yeah, I don't think CSM will get much all in the new codex. I think they'll probably, maybe they'll get one or two new units, and like the Necrons, they'll probably just be character models. I think GW are realizing that character models are insanely profitable, right? Because like if they, let's say they want to release a new box of Berserkers, right? They have to sculpt 10 different poses, 10 different war gear, 10 different fucking variants of helmets, all that sort of shit. So the sculpting side of it's going to take ages. Then they have to print, like, manufacture it, which is a lot of resin and plastic and blah, blah, blah. And then they sell the box for like $100 or whatever, right? Whereas they sell a character, yeah, they're going to put a little bit more effort into the design of the character, but that character is going to be one model, and that one model is going to sell for almost the same as a box of 10. And as a result, the profit margin on that is fucking huge. So that's why I think GW have pivoted into more character designs and more character models than units, so to speak. It's also just I think it's easier to recreate existing characters or even just come up with new characters, because coming up with a whole new unit, you need to come up with a whole new identity of a squad. Whereas to come up with a new character, it could just be like, hey, it's this character, but he has like a slightly better gun and he's an angry man or something. Like, it's not hard to come up with a new character. Whereas to come up with an entire new archetype of a unit, first of all, trying to justify that in the lore can be quite difficult. Like, where did this unit come from? Why did we not have them before? Like, what's the deal? And also trying to create something that's actually interesting and unique. Like, I don't know about you guys, one of the reasons that I don't like Loyalists is because fucking there's like a billion different types of fucking Marine and they're all the same. It's stupid. So that's why I think most codexes, when they come out, they're probably just going to get one new unit, and it's probably going to be a character. I do think that the World Leaders, now we'll talk a little bit about the World Leaders Codex coming up, which, to be fair, they haven't given us, the World Leaders Codex won't be until like the end of the year, if not early next year. So I think we've got a good 12 months before we'll see a World Leaders Codex, which is both good and bad. The index itself I really like. The stratagems in there are good. The army rule is fine. The detachment rule is fine. So I don't think we really need a new book. Everything in there functions okay. And one of the risks with a new book is that you get something new that ruins what you had that you really liked. So I don't want that. That being said, I would love some new units. I think the World Eaters army is super anemic in that, you know, there's very few options in that book, particularly because we lost all of the Forge World stuff, and like we lost things like Raptors, and we lost things like, you know, Obliterators, and, you know, there's lots of options. Like, I would kill for a Vindicator, you know, like that'd be so good in a World Eaters army, but we lost a lot of our options when we got our own codex in exchange for things like Angron and 8-bound, which is fine. But I think a new codex would be a lot of fun as well. So I'm not too stressed about it, but I am also, you know, optimistic and excited for one. When we do get a new codex, I think we're going to get the Juggernaut-mounted Khorne Berserkers, which I'm actually not really excited for, interestingly, simply because I feel like on the tabletop they're going to function very similar to 8-bound, right? Like, they're going to be 8-bound to 3 wounds. These guys might be 4 wounds. But they're both going to have a 3-up armor save. You know, they're probably both going to be toughness 6. You know, like the 8-bound to toughness 6, but the Chaos Lord on Juggernaut, he's also toughness 6. So you'd assume that Khorne Berserkers on Juggernaut's probably also going to be toughness 6. So they're going to be they're kind of just going to be like 8-bound, right? They're just going to play the same as 8-bound. So the only way that works is if they change what 8-bound do, but I don't think they're going to do that, because one of the things we've noticed with codex releases is that they very rarely change what a datasheet does. So I think that the Juggernaut and 8-bound situation is going to be like these two units function very similar. You know, the Juggernauts might have more attacks but less powerful. You know, they might be still hit like a Berserker with, like, you know, strength 6, AP 1, you know, 1 damage. Whereas the 8-bound have the 2 damage and they have the higher AP and stuff. So 8-bound might hit a little bit harder, but then the Juggernauts might have more attacks because they might have, you know, 5, 6 attacks on the rider and then another 4 attacks from the mount. So they're going to hit with both. They might have something where they do mortal wounds on the charge, similar to the Blood Crushers. But again, then you get into this weird position where it's like, we could already ally in Blood Crushers, right? So if we want Juggernaut riding combat guys, we already have that. That's actually already a unit. So I don't know whether Berserkers on Juggernauts is going to be a thing, and if it is, can't really see a world where it's interesting. You know, like, how do they make them an interesting choice? You know, one thing that they could do, which is kind of cringe, but they could go, okay, we're going to give back the Lord Invocatus his fly keyword, right? And then we're going to make a unit of juggernauts and give them the fly keyword and have that as like the corn's equivalent to a jump pack squad. That would actually make juggernauts distinct and interesting from 8-bound. But would it make them interesting enough? Probably not. You're probably going to still just go for whichever one has the right combination of durability and damage output, and then whichever one of them wins that, just everyone takes that and nobody takes the other one. Because they're probably just going to be a little bit too similar to be relevant. What I'd love to see is a few things. I'd love to see some more characters. Like, why don't we have a Chaos Lord, right? Like, World Eater's Chaos Lord. Like, I get that we've got the Masters of Executions, and they're very cool, and I love them. But it would be nice to have options for leaders. And if we've got a Chaos Lord on a Juggernaut, why can't we have one that's not riding a Juggernaut? Like, you know, CSM have the Chaos Lord, and then they have Chaos Lord and Terminator armor. Why don't we have a Chaos Lord and Terminator armor? We've got Terminators. Are we saying that none of the Terminators, the most elite fucking warriors within the army, are capable of leading a force? You know? Why is it that only the cunt riding a fucking Juggernaut is able to lead a force? So I would love to see more HQs, which that would be enough for me. If they went, cool, new World Eaters Codex has come out, and we're going, you've got a Terminator Lord, you've got a Lord on foot, so there's 2 new models, and then maybe the other one, which would be really cool, would be like a Berserker Surgeon, who can attach to a unit, and maybe he's like a Fabius Bihal-esque character, where he enhances the strength or toughness or both of the unit that he's attached to, or maybe he's more of an apothecary style character where he allows you to resurrect models. Something to that effect would be really cool and would be nice to see. And then the other units that I would like to see is, again, circling back onto what we've discussed earlier, is something that's going to be able to shoot stuff. Something that's going to be able to pop transports, something that's going to be able to, if there's that one unit that you charged it, you killed it down to only one model left, it runs away and then another unit charges it and kills you. Now that one model's fucking over there somewhere. Something that's able to just put some shots down range and kill it. So the one thing in the lore, and obviously they try not to invent new lore, they try to take things that exist in the current narrative and make them part of the game, is the Teeth of Khorne, which is like a Devastator unit with a bunch of heavy bolters. And I'd like to see that. I'd like to see heavy bolters with lethal hits and sustained hits in a World Eaters army. So it's like, yep, cool, you take this unit, it's 5 guys, one of them's like a guy with a chain axe, and then the other 4 have heavy bolters. It's like 110, 120 points. It's rubbish in combat, but they just sit there and go pop, 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 and shoot things, right? And then it's like, cool, you take them and you take your Berserkers, and now you can actually play a more nuanced and complex game. That would be really cool. But they would need to have sufficient shooting that they can pop transports. That's the big one. Because one of the main weaknesses I see to the World Eaters is shitloads of transports. It becomes really hard to deal with. There are some really cool tricks you can do to deal with transports that an experienced and veteran player can do. But if you're not experienced and you're not a veteran and you don't know how to do these tricks, World Eaters can be really, really hard to pilot. And I think that creates a barrier to entry that's not very fun to deal with. So like one of them is you can charge a transport with Angron, and then you can charge your Berserkers in, but you can do certain things with your movement so that those Berserkers can't make it into base contact, only like one of them can. And as a result, one of them makes it into base contact, you string around so that you leave a hole, and then when Angron fights, he kills the transport, they have to disembark into that hole. And then because those Berserkers charged, they are now able to activate, and they can pile into the unit that just disembarked from the transport, and then they can fight and kill that as well. So that allows you to kill things inside the transport in the one fight phase, right? So that's really interesting, but that's really hard to do, especially if you're not familiar with the nuances of sequencing in 10th edition combat. So I think it's a bit rich to expect everybody to be able to figure that out. Whereas if instead they went, let's do a unit that can shoot, then everybody can figure out that. You sequence it, you blow up the transport, and then you charge the guys that were inside. And I think that would go a long way to making World Eaters feel more rounded and more complete. I would also like to see some new demon engines, something that's, you know, gonna be able to, you know, fill the role that the old Blood Slaughterers used to fill. But again, it'll be very hard. How do they create a demon engine that is unique and new, that isn't just a Hellbrute under a different name, or isn't just, you know, like you've got the Mauler Fiend, you've got the Forge Fiend, you've got the Defiler, which is kind of in between in the way that it's combat and shooting. Like you've already kind of got all of your demon engines. So perhaps the World Eaters could be an opportunity to do an updated Defiler model. It's also worth noting that in the lore, there's a few World Eaters warbands where they use Defilers as a transport, where basically Berserkers ride the Defiler. That would be really interesting if they made like a new Defiler kit. And in the World Eaters Defiler, it has like a transport capacity of 10, you know? And that way you go, cool, there's all these World Eaters on there, but maybe it has a special rule where, like, you know, when it's shot, you know, the transport, the models inside die on a 1 or something, I don't know. Every time the vehicle suffers a wound, roll a dice. If you roll a 1, one of the models inside suffers a mortal wound instead, or something like that. So it's like the Berserkers are on it, which means they're sort of shielding it in a way, but it's also shielding them, and you create this interesting situation where you've got these Defilers roaming around full of Berserkers. That'd be cool as fuck. And they could do a new Defiler kit to represent that. That's got, you know, instead of the flat panels and very box-like and crab-like, they could still keep it crab-like, but give it, like, you know, more of that Mauler Fiend, Helldrake, Forge Fiend style of armor. That'd be cool as shit. I'll be disappointed if they do that because I just bought 3 Defilers, but it would be worth it, and I would really enjoy that. Cool. What else have we got in here? Mr. OK said that he was there. A unit of Death Shroud's unnatural save rolls caused the Forge Fiend to be smashed. Give World Eaters access to... So Marshall Bloggins has said here, give World Eaters access to Chaos Space Marine data sheets. Now that's an interesting comment. And the reason I find that interesting is because we actually already do have access to CSM datasheets, right? We have Rhinos, we have Forge Fiends, we have Mauler Fiends. Like, these are all Chaos Space Marine units, right? And it's interesting where you draw the line on how many we should have access to. Because you obviously, if you just go, cool, World Eaters get all of the Chaos Space Marine datasheets and the World Eaters ones, that sucks, because then Chaos Space Marine players would be like, why play Chaos Space Marines when you can play World Eaters and get all of it plus more, right? And if you did the same for Thousand Sons and Death Guard, you'd get, you know, these feel-bad moments for vanilla CSM players where they'd be like, why bother, right? But if you have none of them, then none of those, the World Eaters range, the Thousand Sons range, and the Death Guard range, they're not big enough to support an entire faction, right? As I've discussed with World Eaters, like, we just don't have the DACA. If you said World Eaters don't have access to any of the CSM data sheets, they'd be rubbish, right? Because you'd be like, well, there's no Rhinos, there's no transport. Like, what the fuck? So there needs to be a line drawn somewhere on what they have access to, which also means that, you know, the Chaos Space Marines have their own unique identity as well. Like, for example, Obliterators, I think they should be only available to regular Chaos Space Marines, all right? I think that having, you know, Obliterators in a World Eaters army, whilst it's cool, it's like, but can you imagine a World Eater becoming an Obliterator? I can't, because Obliterators is like, you know, essentially they obsess over their guns so much that they somewhat become guns, right? Like, that doesn't make sense for a World Eater. That's much more of a old Mutilator or an 8-bound mentality, right? So I can see that. I can also kind of see things like Warp Talons, you know, being an exclusively general Chaos Space Marine unit, as opposed to something that's universal, available to all the Traitor Legions. But I think what they should have done, or what they could do, is go cool. All of the generic Space Marine, Chaos Space Marine stuff like Predators, Vindicators, Land Raiders, Havocs, anything that's like a Space Marine but spiky, right? That should all be available to all the legions, right? Because they all came from that same place, right? So legionaries, World Eaters should have access to legionaries, because not every World Eater became a Khorne Berserker, right? So they should have legionaries, Khorne Berserkers, Thousand Sons, similar sort of thing. They should maybe not Thousand Sons. Obviously, you want to draw a line somewhere, but more or less all of the legions should have access to all of the general stuff. And then what you do is you go, cool, because they broke off at the heresy, so these are all relics that live on from the heresy. And then you go, cool, since the heresy, the general Chaos Space Marines have invented things like the Mauler Fiend, whereas the World Eaters, they invented the Blood Slaughterer, right? They took a different path. So that would be cool. And that would mean that, World Eaters would have Raptors, World Eaters would have, but they wouldn't have Warp Talons, for example. Something like that could be cool. I don't know. That's my thoughts. Let me know what your thoughts are in the chat and I'll read some out. And we'll get a conversation going on those. If you've got any specific things you'd like to see in an upcoming World Eaters or upcoming Chaos Space Marine Codex, or even if you play a different faction. I imagine most of the people in this chat probably play the Chaos factions, but let me know. I think demons are an interesting one. Like, what do they do with demons now? Do they invent new demons? That seems kind of weird. Or do they just keep doing like what they did with the somewhat recent Slaneshi thing, where they just created a bunch of characters like Celeste and the Entraptress and all that kind of crap? Do they just go, cool, let's just keep creating new character style models? I don't know. I crack up every time he burps. Well, I'm glad you enjoy it, because I'm going to keep drinking and it's going to get more frequent. Juggernaut Cavalry would be super cool via Pyrus. I know I just sort of ranted about this for a fair while, but I'd be really curious, and if you're still in the chat, let me know. Like, what would you need to see from Juggernaut Cavalry for them to be significantly different from 8-bound? Because by my approximation, they're going to more or less play like the same thing, right? They're going to be a elite heavy infantry unit that's going to be faster than a foot-slugging berserker, that's going to hit harder than a foot-slugging berserker. It's going to be tougher. Like, I feel like if you were to describe an 8-bound, like you could very much almost use berserkers on juggernauts and just use the 8-bound profile, right? Because it's going to be functionally the same. I think one thing that would be really cool if they do that is the juggernauts have to do mortal wounds on the charge. And that allows you to get around some of the different limitations. For example, if you were able to do enough mortal wounds on the charge to kill a transport and then fight the guys that were inside, that would be fantastic. So something like that, where these guys have just a real devastating charge. And that would also make them distinct from regular 8-bound in the way that, these guys would really hinge on fighting first. Another thing that you could do is you could make these guys like deep strike with pluses to their charge, so that they're a really reliable threat in that regard. There's a few things that you could do. But I personally am not holding my breath for berserkers riding juggernauts. A red butcher rule for Terminators on a Lord could make a nice unit and lead a combo. I agree, red butchers absolutely should be a thing. I don't think the World Eaters should have had regular Terminators. I think they should have just called the unit Red Butchers and given it different war gear loadout. You still use the normal Terminator kit, but you can't take the fucking flamers, the heavy flamers, the autocannons. It's just like a mandatory loadout of all the combat weapons. Call them Red Butchers, and give them their own rules. Make them higher strength, higher number of attacks. Give them some ability like reroll charges or something like that, and make them a unique unit. And then obviously when the Codex comes out, release a kit and update them that way, right? I'd love to see a kit where every Terminator has, multiple chain fists or something. But then you get into the same problem, and this is a real big problem for World Eaters, and I don't know how GW is going to solve it, is that if you make the Red Butchers a real savage combat unit, like they are in Heresy and like they are in the lore, how are you distinguishing them from 8-bound? I'm actually starting to think introducing 8-bound was just a mistake. They just shouldn't have done it. Like, they should have had the Terminators and the Juggernaut guys, and then, you don't need another elite, tough sort of combat unit. Either that, or they could make the Juggernauts even faster than 8-bound, but 8-bound are already really fast, so maybe they should have made Juggernauts slower and made 8-bound even faster. Maybe 8-bound, instead of having Exalted 8-bound, they should just all be regular 8-bound, and they have Scout, and that's the thing that separates them from the Juggernauts. Juggernauts are a bit tougher, but 8-bound have Scout. That'd be cool. I don't know. I feel like I've circled around this topic enough, though, so I'm going to leave it for now. Rumba's asked, you mentioned Chaos Vindicators. I actually prefer them over Forge Fiends for CSM. Can you compare and contrast the utility of these two units since they are very, very similar in points cost? Good question. So, obviously that's a Chaos Space Marines question because the World Eaters can't take Vindicators. Now, the Vindicator has a few things that I think whenever you're doing this, the first thing to do is just look at what is it that they each have that the other one doesn't have. Because then you can start talking about whether or not one of those fits the rest of your army better than the other. And I think the Vindicator is tougher and has a better save characteristic, so is overall more durable, which is pretty useful. But its damage output is just different. Right? And I think this is the main distinction between the units and how you will decide which one of them you want. I think the Vindicator has variable number of shots and variable damage, which generally I advise against units like that because they become way too swingy. If you have a random number of shots and each one of those shots does a random number of damage, like let's say you got D6 shots and they do D6 damage, that could be anywhere from one shot that does 1 damage to 6 shots of which do 6 damage, so 36 damage. So you've got a range of 1 to 36. That's really swingy, right? Whereas if you've got a gun that has 3 shots and they're D6 damage, right? Or D6 shots that are 3 damage, then you only really have that 1 point of variability, whereas the Vindicator has 2. And that makes it a really swingy unit. And what will happen if you have a Vindicator, and I'm sure, Roomba, I'm sure you'll be able to attest to this, some games, it'll pop off and it will absolutely win you the game because you'll roll 6 shots, you'll get 5 hits, you'll wound them 4 times, then you'll roll your D6 damage because it's high AP so they don't get a save, and you roll 4d6 and you roll slightly high and you do like 22 wounds and you kill a knight. And you're like, cool, the Vindicator just came on from strat reserves and went boom and killed a knight. That's amazing, right? But then there'll be other games where you bring on from strat reserves, you go to shoot that knight, you roll your d6 shots and you roll a 1. And you're like, oh, for fuck's sake, and then you miss. And you're like, oh, I just came on and did nothing, right? So I think the swinginess of the Vindicators is a problem. Whereas the Forge Fiends, yeah, they're swingy because they have the D3 shots, which is random. It could be anywhere between 3 shots and 9. They also have the blast rule, which helps eliminate some of that randomness, right? Because if you've got 3 guns and they're all D3 blast and you're shooting a unit of 10, well, you're going to get an extra 6 shots from the blast rule, plus your 3d3, which is going to be an average of 6 shots. So on average, you're going to get as many additional shots as you get shots, right? Which means the swinginess is mitigated there. And then the fact that they're flat 3 damage means that there's no swinginess on the damage rolls, right? So I think the Forge Fiend is less swingy, which means it's more reliable. You can count on it to do what it needs to do a lot better than you can the Vindicator. Now that doesn't mean that the Forge Fiend's not going to have times when it rolls high and times when it rolls low. It's a little bit more consistent and reliable, which is generally speaking better. Now I say generally speaking because you've still got to weigh up the points cost of the unit and the potential. Like for example, if you have something that's going to do somewhere between 1 and 3, it's going to do an average of 2, right? That's pretty reliable because at best it's going to be 3 times as effective, right? So that's a reliable unit. But if you have another unit that's going to do somewhere between 1 and 6, right? That's less reliable because it could do 6 times as much as, you know, that's the higher range, but its average is going to be 3, and its average is actually better than the best case scenario for the 1 to 3. So even though that D6 is more swingy, it's just flat out better, even though it's more swingy. So it's not an exact science that swinginess is always bad. Sometimes swinginess is perfectly fine. And there's also some scenarios where swinginess can be massively to your advantage. So for example, if you have a flat 3 damage weapon, or if you have a choice between flat 3 damage and a d6 damage, right? Now, a d6 damage is on average going to roll 3.5, right? Because half the time it's going to roll 3 or lower, half the time it's going to roll 4 or higher. So on average, it's going to do more damage, right? But it's swingy. Sometimes it's only going to roll a 1, sometimes it's going to roll a 5, right? So how do you decide what you would rather? Do you want the swinginess of the d6 damage, or do you want the reliability of the flat 3 damage, right? And the reason that you would want the flat 3 is if you're predicting that you're going to be versing a lot of things that are either 3 wounds or 6 wounds, or they're 2 wounds with a 6 up, feel no pain, or that sort of stuff. That's when the flat 3 damage is going to be superior. But if you're versing a lot of things that are 4 wounds, well, then the d6 damage is way better. Because if you're versing something with 4 wounds, half the time you're going to roll 4 to wound, 4 on your damage roll, and just straight kill it. And the other half, you're going to hurt it, right? Which means then the second shot is even more likely to come through. So if you roll a 1 or a 2, then on your second shot, you only need to roll a 1 or a 2 to kill it. Whereas if you're flat 3 damage, there's no variable there. Every single time it's going to require 2 shots to kill something. So in an environment where there's things that are like 4 wounds, then all of a sudden that d6 damage is way better than a flat 3 damage. And then you've also got the fact that if you've got something like multiple units that are d6 damage, and you're versing targets that are like 10 wounds, right? So you're into vehicles. The d6 damage is way better because you can go, cool, the first one's got 2 las cannons, he's going to put 1 into that vehicle and 1 into that vehicle, and then you roll your damage and you get that information before deciding where the next vehicle shoots. So if you go, cool, that one I only did 1 damage, but that one I did 6, then you might go, okay, cool, now I'm going to fire both of them into the one that only took 1 damage and reliably kill it. Or I'm going to split fire again and I'm going to put 1 into that one and 1 into a different one and try to spike high on that. So it allows you to have new information based on the result of those variable rolls, and then make decisions accordingly, which is a really good way of sort of utilizing and getting an advantage out of that variability. So swinginess and variability is not always bad. However, in the case of the Vindicator versus the Forge Fiend, I think you've got to look at the current meta. You've got to look at the things that are popular right now. For example, Chaos Space Marines are really popular right now, and they bring lots of 3 wound models, whether it be Possessed or Chosen. They bring lots of 3 wound models, and they also bring lots of 2 wound models, which 3 damage weapons aren't bad into because they don't have much waste. And because of that, I think that in the current meta, things like that, things like 8 bound being 3 wounds each, there's lots of things like that. Most people's Terminators, I think that the reliability of the Forge Fiend makes it superior. That being said, I also really like the idea of an army where it's just got one of each. And then you have the ability to go, okay, cool, I've got my enemy unit over there is all 3 wounds, so I'm going to bring on the Forge Fiend and target them, while the Vindicator targets this 4 wound model. Because the Vindicator is much better at dealing with 4 wound models than the Forge Fiend. So I think there is definitely a world where both of them are very good, and I don't think there's any reason not to just take one of each. A lot of people take 2 Forge Fiends, that's very common, and yeah, I think if the Vindicator is something that you're interested in, I think it's definitely worth playing around with the idea of taking a single Vindicator and a single Forge Fiend. If you're doing that, you probably want the Vindicator to be a Nurgle one, and you probably want the Forge Fiend to be undivided. And that way the Forge Fiend, the turn that it arrives from strategic reserves, which you're almost always going to place this guy in strategic reserves, just because that way he can come on and he can get the angles that he wants to. People can't hide from him as easily. Whereas if you deploy him on the table, he's not very fast, so they can just go, okay, cool, in your turn you could move to here or here, so if I'm there, you can't shoot me. Whereas if you're there and they're in strategic reserves, they can come on from this angle and they can actually shoot. So I would advise putting your guy in strategic reserves, and probably the same with the Vindicator as well. And that way, if they put something out and it's a 4 wound model, you go, cool, I'm going to bring on my Vindicator. They put out 3 wound models, then you bring out your Forge Fiend. And you can sort of tempo it and use the right tool for the right situation. So, yeah, big fan of those. Just checking. Microphone's still working. Good as. What else we got here? Cauldron of Blood, Doom Blaster, Death Dealer is the question from Electro Snow. Yeah, there's a few different... These are all different ideas for demon engines. And there's precedent for this in the lore. There's also the Tower of Skulls, which I used to have some converted. My first ever Lord of Skulls kits that I bought 2 of them, and I converted 2. This is before the Forge World Khitan came out. I converted 2 of them to have legs, so that they were running around, and then with the tank tracks that were left over, I made Tower of Skulls, which I basically took some like ruins, some administrative ruins and whatnot, Gothic ruins, and built like a castle on top that had a cannon coming out of it. Because that's something that used to be in the lore, is these Towers of Skulls. And I think they kind of merged them to make the new Lord of Skulls, which is fine. But it would be nice to see a return of that, and a Cauldron of Blood would be cool as well, just to sort of mix up the range a bit. Yeah, that's cool. What else we got here? Durability would likely be T6, 2+ save, 4 wounds at least. Maybe give a 5+ invulnerable with mortal wound charge. That's from Pyphorus. I assume he's talking about the Juggernauts there. I actually don't understand why the Chaos Lord on the Juggernaut is toughness 6, when these cunts, the Bloodletters on a Juggernaut, are toughness 7. That to me just does not make sense. I feel like that they should, Lord of Mikadis and the Juggernaut Lord should be toughness 7, and then if they released the Juggernauts and made them toughness 7 with a 2-up armor save, well, now they actually are distinctly different from 8-bound, which would be toughness 6 with a 3-up armor save. If they did that, then I'd be like, okay, now we're talking. Now it's like taking a Terminator and 8-bound and slapping them together, right? And now it's actually would be a distinctly different unit. But I actually think that these guys being toughness 7 is the actual mistake, because I don't think Thunderwolves, I don't think they're toughness 7. I think they're toughness 6 as well. So I think these guys are the anomaly. I do like the idea of them having a 2-up save. Like if you put 2-up saves on 8-bound, they'd be absolutely bananas. Toughness 6 with a 2-up save is really tough. Maybe they could have an inbuilt Armor of Contempt, where they reduce the AP of incoming attacks by 1 to a minimum of 1, or something like that. And yeah, I think the devastating wounds on the charge is very good. But like I said, at this point, it feels like you just take allied blood crushers. Like, I don't think they need to invent this unit. I don't think it helps. I don't think it changes anything. But I like the idea. Oh, that's a good one. Callum Emerald has said, make the Juggernaut charge a 3d6. That would be interesting. I think when it comes to 3d6 charges, what happens there is it creates a unit with an identity around Deep Strike charge. Right? So 8-bound, for example, the identity of that unit, in my opinion, of the 8-bound, is it's a small package because it's only 3 models, right? So it's very, very dense, dense damage, which means it's easy to hide. It's easy to sneak it around places because it's very small. They're also able to launch out very fast. They can move out, they can advance and charge, they can auto advance 6, and they can get in, right? So that creates these little missiles that you can deploy on the table somewhere safe. They're easy to be safe because they're small, and they can launch from their good distances and make reliable charges. They're also really good for a rapid ingress threat because, like I said, they're very small, so they can fit places. It's hard for your opponent to block them out. And then obviously on top of that, you've got the capacity to scout move as well. So lots of reasons why 8-bound are really good, and why I often think that their identity is about deploying on the table, and like I said in my trading video, it's a lot of the time about launching those attacks from somewhere safe sequentially. Whereas what you could do is you could go, cool, the Juggernaut's thing is that they emerge from the warp, right? They deep strike in, and they just charge then and there with a 3d6 charge. And that way, they're not reliant on rapid ingress, and they're not reliant on, because obviously Juggernauts won't be able to go through walls, they won't have the same mobility as the 8-bound. So the 8-bound's identity is about being on the table, being able to move through walls, and being able to rapidly respond. Whereas the Juggernauts, their identity would be about arriving and hitting the same turn they arrive, which is a very different identity to what the 8-bound have, because they have no ability to get reliable charges from Deep Strike. So yeah, that's actually really, really interesting. I like that one. Of the 4 Cult Legionnaires, which one is your favorite in CSM? So we're talking about having either Berserkers, Noise Marines, what are they called? Rubric Marines, or the Plague Marines in a Chaos Space Marine army. I mean, personally, I don't necessarily rate any of them. I think you're probably just as good with normal Legionaries, and it's hard to beat Chosen. Well, Berserkers are out for starters, right? They're eliminated because Chosen do the same thing but better. World Eaters, Berserkers in a World Eaters army is a different beast because they gain access to advance and charge with an auto 6 advance stratagem, so that's different. And they can also take the Master of Executions for always fights first, which is different, right? So there's the World Eaters, the Berserkers in a World Eaters army will be different than they will be in a Chaos Space Marine army. And in the Chaos Space Marine army, you have better options than Berserkers to fulfill a very similar role. So Berserkers are out. I think the Death Guard, Plague Marines, probably similar boat in that, I mean, they're relatively cheap if I remember correctly. And they're relatively tough. They're probably not bad. The Noise Marines are very cheap and provide some DACA through the Blastmaster. It's actually really, I really miss my Noise Marines. I used to really enjoy Noise Marines, but I think they've lost a lot of their flavor. They don't do the damage they used to do. The Sonic Blasters just don't cut it. You used to be able to get your Sonic Blasters up to 2 damage with like Strength 5, I think it was, with +1 to wound, which meant most things you were wounding on 4s. They used to have the ability to get reroll wounds as well. So like they used to just be really, really good. whereas now I feel like they're a shadow of their former self. So yeah, I think probably the best of the cult troops in a Chaos Space Marine army would probably be Plague Marines. But again, I think the existing units from that index are good enough that you don't really need to take Plague Marines. You don't really need to take Berserkers or Noise Marines or any of that sort of stuff. I think you're probably better off just taking, your chosen. And obviously, this will change if there's points cost changes. But as it stands, I don't really see the value in cult troops in Chaos Space Marine armies. That sort of brings us up. I think I'm up to date with comments now. So unless anybody has anything else, I don't know how long this stream has been going for so far. Does it tell me on here? No idea. No freaking idea. I might jump off for a bit. Catch my get a bit of a break, and I might jump on again later. I might even I've got some mates coming over later today who are going to be joining me for some drinks and some hobby. So depending on what they are up to, if they're keen, we might do another live stream, and it'll be more than just myself here, because obviously I've got, so far in this painting session, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I've got 7 guys, nearly finished 8 guys, just doing the gold trim on these fucking juggernauts. So I'm not even halfway through just the juggernauts, and then I've got the skull cannons to go as well, and the characters as well. I got so much work to do, so I might end up soon. Although there has just been another comment come in, so I guess I'll just jump on that real quick. As a new World Eaters player, I have a question about using Angron and when to know when to throw him or keep him back into different matchups. Any help is appreciated. So Angron is, in my opinion, he's a must take for a World Eaters list. But knowing how to use him is challenging. I see a lot of people that deploy him like right on the front line, and then they just go in for a turn 1 charge, because he has the capacity to move 22 inches and then charge, which is really powerful. However, if you do that and your opponent kills him first turn, then in your first turn you have to go in with no Angron support, and that's not great, because Angron's, one of his main abilities, in my opinion, is that 6-inch aura of reroll hits. That really turns on all your other units. So I think deploying him that aggressively can be a mistake, unless there's somewhere you can deploy him where they're not going to be able to effectively deal with him turn 1. Like if you've got a big ruin at the front somewhere and you can deploy there, and they're not going to be able to move to shoot him turn 1, but you can move to charge them turn 1, then sure, it's fine. But I personally find that one of the ways to get good success with the World Eaters is to either do trades where you're trading with 1 unit at a time, or overwhelming your opponent, just going, cool, I'm going to hide everything, and then on turn 2 or 3, everything comes out at once, and then does a bunch of damage, and then your opponent doesn't have the ability to deal with everything that just came out. And I think when you're playing Angron, you just keep that in mind. Is it's like, am I going to play this strategy of just trading 1 for 1? In which case you need to hold Angron back, play him conservatively, and only bring him out when he's going to kill their big thing. So they might move a bunch of Terminators or a big vehicle or something up into the middle, and you're like, well, now Angron goes in and kills that. You're not going to send him out to kill like a unit of 5 scouts off of an objective and then die, right? You need to trade him for something really valuable, something that's going to threaten the rest of your army, right? And all of that small stuff, that's where you trade your Berserkers and your 8-bound for. So that's one way to play him, is that trading game where you hold him. The other version is when you do that big go turn where you send everything in, and obviously you send him in, but he needs to be central so that when you do send him in, everything else is getting access to his rerolls, and you're able to do the damage there. So yeah, that would be my thoughts on sort of how to wield Angron. The other thought that's worth considering depends if you have Lord of Skulls in your list, you kind of want Angron to die early, because that increases the number of times that you're going to be able to try to resurrect him, and the Lord of Skulls increases your chances of that. If you don't have a Lord of Skulls in your list and you're just relying on a straight natural 666, I actually find that you want to play conservatively with Angron because he doesn't get resurrected as often as you'd think, or as you'd hope. And if he dies early and then never gets resurrected, that's a huge problem. So playing conservatively with him is very good. And he's very tough. Toughness 11 with 2 up save, 4 up invulnerable save, and more often than not he's going to have a 6 up feel no pain as well. That just makes him very tough. So you play with him assuming that when he dies he doesn't come back, and leverage his inherent toughness to keep him alive for multiple turns. Generally speaking, I find Angron has to kill 2 or 3 things to be worth it, and he also has to enhance nearby units like Berserkers or 8-bound so that they're getting the reroll hits, so that then they're getting benefit from him as well. Whereas if he just goes in, kills 1 thing, dies, and then never gets resurrected, then he was bad, and he was a waste in your list. So that's the thing. And I am also working with a mate on some different versions of the World Eaters list that don't include Angron, because there's some arguments to be made that he can be a bit of an asset because he is so expensive. Your game plan then revolves around making sure that you get value out of him, and as a result your opponent can sort of try to mitigate his value and really fuck with your game plan. Whereas if you don't have Angron, you're just like, cool, I've just got tons of small units of stuff. Each one of them is self-reliant and independent and doesn't require anything else. Well, now it's very hard for your opponent to stop them from getting value because they can't cut off the link between them and something else. Whereas if you have Angron, and Angron, in order for Angron to get valuable, not only does he need to kill stuff, but he needs to be activating Berserkers so that they get more value. If they're able to isolate Angron from your Berserkers by either killing him or killing the Berserkers or making it so that you're not near each other or something like that, well, now they've actually mitigated a lot of the value of Angron, which hurts your game plan. Whereas if you just had multiple units of Berserkers and you build your army in such a way that you don't care whether they're near each other or whether they're cut off from one another, then you're not vulnerable to those sorts of tricks. So, yeah, that's my thoughts on Angron. And yeah, thank you for everyone who tuned in for this chat. I'm going to leave this room set up for this so that we can jump back in potentially later today, maybe tomorrow morning, around the same time, we'll see. And if anybody has any questions, keep them going in the chat. I'll jump in and I'll answer any questions in there as well. And if there's any that you want to hear me expand on more, feel free to jump on next time we go live, and we'll keep this conversation going. I really enjoy this. It helped me keep motivated to keep painting these guys. These guys have been sitting on my table for probably about 6 months now, and you know, it's hard to get the motivation. I'm sure you guys all understand that and experience that yourselves. So this is a really good way to do it, and I really appreciate you guys joining me for this recap of 2023, plans for 2024, and hobby chat live stream. Yeah, so thanks for tuning in. Thank you very much for everyone who commented, and I'll talk to you guys soon. All right, cheers, mate. See ya. How do I